covered routing in Rails 3 pretty extensively back in episode number 203, but there are some advanced features which I did not cover that really show off the flexibility of the router in Rails 3. So in this episode, I want to show you some more cool things you could do with the Rails 3 router. We'll start off with a simple example here where we just have one route, the root URL pointing to the home controller's index action. Now the important thing to note about this string here is that it's actually a shortcut for your convenience. Behind the scenes, this home index action string is actually going to be translated to home controller.action index. And that will actually return a rack application. So this adds a lot of modularity and flexibility to our router because it means that our router can accept any rack application it wants. And this is also awesome because it's easy to get a rack application out of any Rails controller. To prove the point here, we could quickly make a simple rack application by just passing in environment hash into a new proc object, and then we just return an array with the status code, the hash of headers, which I'll just leave blank, and then the body content will just say welcome. And then when we go to localhost port 3000, we just get welcome as the return response. So that's just going straight to our rack application. So this means it's very easy to integrate any rack application into your Rails app, such as Sinatra. So let's try that here. So the first thing we'll do is go to the bottom of our gem file and just include Sinatra here. So we'll just say gem Sinatra, and then we can just run bundle install to make sure we have that installed. And then we just have to make our Sinatra application. So I'll do that inside the lib directory here. Just create a new file here called, we'll call it homeapp.rb. And then in here, we'll just make a new class called homeapp, have it inherit from Sinatra base. And then we could just call get in here for a root URL, and then just return something like hello from Sinatra. And now going back to our routes file, we can now change that root URL to point to homeapp, because that is now a rack application from Sinatra. And just reload our root URL path here, and we now get hello from Sinatra. As you can see, Rails 3 really embraces rack, and one of the benefits of this is the new redirect method. Let me show you. Now let's say we have a new route for an about page, so it has an about URL, and that goes to an info controller's about action. Now I've already created this controller action behind the scenes, but what I want to point out here is what if we wanted to change the route URL instead of about, we want to point it to about us and have that go to the controller action. Well, now we have a legacy route which we need to handle a redirect to. Well, it's really easy to do redirects in Rails 3. All you have to do is just call redirect and then pass in the new URL you want to redirect to, so about us. And that way, our old route will still work, but the new one will be used for our new about page. And we could try this out. If we just go to the about path, it'll redirect us to about us. So that redirect method and the routes work. Let's take a look at another example of redirects. So let's say we have a products resource and we want to map a shortcut URL called /p and then the ID of the product, and then we want that to go to that specific product. And so we can set up a redirect here to go to that given product ID. So we can say products / and then the ID number here. Now to insert the parameter here dynamically into the redirect string, what you have to do is actually use a %sign and then curly braces and then just put ID inside of there. And that will automatically insert whatever the dynamic ID is into that redirect URL. Now I already have a controller set up, so we can give this a try by putting p/1 in the URL, and then we go to that given product page, products/1. Now if you need to have more control over how the redirect happens, you can pass a block into this redirect method instead, but I won't go into detail here. I'll just refer you to the links in the show notes for more information on that. What I do want to talk about though is Rails Metal. Now back in episode 150 I showed you how to add Rails Metal in a Rails 2.3 app, but in Rails 3 the technique is quite a bit different, but it's much nicer now because of the rack integration. To duplicate what I did in that episode is actually very simple. All we have to do is set up a new route in our routes file. Let's go to the processes URL and take that to a custom rack application that we'll create called processes app. And then we can create the new app in the lib directory. We'll just create a new file here called processes app. And then we'll just create that class and then define a class method in here called call, accepts an environment hash. And then in here we'll just do the same command that we ran in the episode 150 and just return that result. And now if we go to our application, the processes URL, it takes us to that process list, and we can just hit reload, and it's very fast because it's just using a simple rack application. Okay, so actually nothing fancy is going on here. All we're doing is just creating a simple rack application, but it does duplicate the behavior that we had in episode 150 in a much simpler way. However, in Rails 3 we can also expand upon this and pull in the parts of a Rails controller that we want so that we can make this processes app more fancy. For example, let's say we want this to render an ERB template instead of returning this raw rack response here. So what we can do is have this inherit from action controller metal. So this will pull in some controller behavior from your Rails application, but it's very low level. So what we need to do is include other modules to get other behavior that we want. And one of these modules is called action controller rendering. And that way we'll be able to render ERB templates. But we also have to specify what view path we want. So to do this, we can call append view path and then point it to our Rails root /app views directory. And this way it'll look inside that normal views directory in our application for templates for this new processes app. That's sort of a low-level controller. So what we want is this controller to have an index action, and then we'll assign our processes to a processes instance variable. That way we'll be able to use it in the view. But one difference we have here is that we have to call render somewhere in our action in order for it to render that template. So now we just have to make that template, and we can do so inside of our views directory. Let's make a new directory here called processes app, and then make a new file in here called index.html.erb. So here we can put whatever we want, such as processes, and then make a little pre-tag in here with our processes output. So this way we'll be able to display our processes just like we would inside of a normal controller view template. But this is much lower level, so it will have better performance. And then finally, we just need to go back into our routes file and change this processes app to point to that specific action, which is using the action method. Just point it to the index action, and again, that returns a rack application. Now you may need to restart your Rails application, but once you do, you should be able to go to the processes URL, and then you'll get your template which you created, which just lists all the processes. So as you can see, Rails 3 is very modular and allows you to pull in exactly what you want out of a controller and into a custom rack application. But keep in mind, you're only going to be saving a couple milliseconds at most over a normal, traditional Rails controller. So I first recommend trying a Rails controller and doing some performance testing. If you need faster performance, then definitely go with a rack application like I show here, and then just pull in what you need. And that's all I have for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it.